Welcome back, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. This panel is, well, what is the title of it? We are talking today about the impacts of generative AI on the creative industries. So, as you may very well know, the UK creative sector is a powerhouse of the UK economy. I mean, one only has to look around London to see the creative industry taking flight everywhere throughout the city. Thousands of people in the UK identify as creative workers, including artists, performers, technicians, and craftspeople in domains as diverse as film and theater, computer game development, textile arts, graphic artists, and of course, writers of every kind. But there are issues that are beginning to emerge for creative workers in our turn to generative AI, as recent strikes in Hollywood show, first by Hollywood writers and now by Hollywood actors, who are working in domains that were thought to be safe from AI, but now they're feeling new pressures and uncertainties. So in our panel today, we will hear from leading figures in the UK creative sector, including some who are experiencing AI impacts within it. I'll begin with some introductions, beginning with myself. Hello, my name is Mike Katell, Dr. Mike Katell. I'm from the Alan Turing Institute, where I'm a research fellow in ethics and responsible innovation. We conduct a variety of projects. Primarily, we advise the UK government and international governments and multilateral institutions on a range of AI policy questions. I'm joined today by four amazing panelists. We've had some amazing conversations before the panel, and hopefully these will be expressed during our panel today. So beginning with Laurence Bouvard. Laurence is a Lambda-trained professional actress and voiceover artist whose career spans West End theater, TV, film, cartoons, games, and audiobooks, and currently serves as chair of the Screen and New Media Industrial Committee of Equity, the Entertainment Union. With a BA in Linguistics from Harvard University and an MSc in Computer Science from the University of London, Laurence has a unique insight into the issues that AI poses to performers in particular. And you'll see that I'm going out of order, which is bad form, very bad form. So I'm going to correct that and start now. This is Linden. Linden Walcott-Burton is a culture policy officer for the Mayor of London for the Greater London Authority's Culture and Creative Industries Strategy Team, where he is the lead official for the policy area of artificial intelligence in the creative industries. He is currently conducting research to explore the impacts, opportunities, and risks of AI across 7 creative sectors: music, performing arts, visual arts, video games, film, fashion, and museums, as well as the impact of chatbot technologies. Next to Laurence, we have Shobana Iyer. Shobana is a practicing barrister with over 20 years of broad commercial and corporate experience. She specializes in complex cases frequently involving issues in corporate, intellectual property, and technology, including AI and blockchain. She has experience in a variety of industry sectors, including renewable energy and climate-related disputes, financial, retail, sports, creative arts, and technology, media, and telecommunications. And finally, down at the end, we have Naomi Poole. Naomi Poole is General Secretary of the Musicians Union, a community of over 33,000 musicians working to protect rights and campaign for a fair music industry. Naomi studied English and drama at Royal Holloway University of London and has previously worked as Assistant General Secretary to the Writers Guild of Great Britain. So thank you, panelists, for joining us today. I really appreciate you taking the time to address this interesting and pressing topic. I'm going to direct my first question to you, Naomi. You represent tens of thousands of musicians working in the UK. As we know, I think as all of us know, there were already pressures and struggles facing the UK creative sector before the advent of generative AI. Could you say a little bit about what issues are most pressing and most important that you're hearing from your membership and how those issues are being brought to light or illuminated by the turn to generative AI?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think our members, because they work across lots of different areas of music, most of our members have a portfolio career, so they might do a bit of music teaching, they might be session musicians, they might perform live. And, you know, I think the impact of AI could potentially be felt across all of those different areas of work. I think there's a lot of our members who see it still as something that's in the distance and that's not impacting their work on a day-to-day basis now. I think there's other creators who are already beginning to embrace the technologies in a sort of assistive way. And it's funny because there was a survey recently of composers which showed that some of them are using it in music, but actually more of them are using it to create album artwork, for example. So potentially taking away jobs from other creators, which is an interesting ethical dilemma in itself. But I think one of the key issues for our members is the ingestion of music by AI systems in order to develop new music that will potentially be competing with our members' works. And we would like to see individual creators have consent or the right not to consent to their works being ingested. And the fear is that the technology is already running away with itself and that catalogues of works have already been ingested. And the position at the moment from companies like Microsoft is that there's no copyright infringement if works are ingested and then used to create new works. So, I mean, it could pose an existential threat to a lot of our members' livelihoods, and that's the fear. So we're very active in trying to influence policy making at the moment, and very keen that record labels and music publishers recognise that, as well as their consent having to be sought because they own the copyright in a lot of our members' works, we also want the individual creators to have a say, because it might be that a lot of our members actually wouldn't want their works to be ingested. And if they are, how do you prove that they have been, and how do you trace back a new work to the works that might have influenced it? So it's a very complicated area and something that some of our members, I would say, probably haven't even begun to get their heads around yet.
Right, yeah, thank you for that. It certainly is a complicated area. And actually, I think I'd like to direct my next question then to Shobana. I'm working on the legal side of this question. Intellectual property is obviously one of the domains that you work in. What are you seeing as some pressing issues that are coming to the fore now with generative AI? And also, of course, if you can link those to ongoing issues as well, that would be helpful.
Right. So, well, I mean, there are a lot of issues with regard to generative AI that have come up. I mean, including from data protection issues to imitation, improper. Now? Thank you. Right, so there are all different kind of issues, but in terms of the intellectual property infringement and attribution side, I think one of the major areas of real concern is, of course, the real essence of human, one of the main areas of creativity. What is creativity? And how do we actually assess it in such a way that it's protected in terms, particularly, so let's take one of the intellectual property rights that are well known and that's been going through a lot of litigation at the moment, which is copyright. To have a copyright and to take infringement action, your copyright work has to be original. That's one of the requirements. And originality usually means that there's some kind of skill and labour that's been put into it, and a form of human creativity that's been attributed to it. And of course, protected works are there for literary and artistic and music and dramatic works are protected under the Copyright and Design Patents Act. But there is also in UK law a particular protection for computer-generated work. And when we're talking about computer-generated work, we're talking about work that is only in the case of the full creation, as they call it under Section 9.3, is in the case of literary, dramatic, music or artistic work which are computer-generated, the author shall be taken as the person by whom the arrangements necessary for the creation of the work are undertaken. So you can have computer-related works. Obviously, it's not protected to the length of time as a normal human-created work. And this is where I really think about, well, is the generative AI being used as a tool? Whereas when you're using it as a tool and you are actually then putting a skill and labor into it to make it more unique to the essence of human creativity, then obviously you are the author of it because you have created it. But when it's solely a computer-generated product, there's a big question about authorship, and you can just imagine what the kind of chaos could be about that, about who owns those rights, what is it, and those kind of areas. Most of the other civil jurisdictions and EU, etc., expect that kind of originality to be there. And I think that's an area which is actually going through. You can see that that's where it's being, from Getty Images to the actions in California with regard to writers having their scripts and taken, and the actions being taken about copyright issues there. So I think copyright is an area which is going to be going through another area of consultation, I'm sure, by the IPO in future, because the IPO have done a full consultation recently, but I think it's, as we know, it's early days as well, the generative AI, although it's been around since, I think, 2018, when Edmund Bellamy's portrait was actually, which was created totally by a generative AI, was sold at Christie's for, I think, around $432,000. That was in 2018, before the spell of now with the wave that's come in 2022, and now with generative AI being more of an open, innovative model that's being allowed. So there's going to be big questions about originality and authorship as well, about who is the actual author. And I think that's going to cause a lot of conundrums, which actually, I'd say English law can adapt to it and sort that out to a certain degree, because English common law, we can adapt pragmatically to those actions. So we shall see where the courts take us on that.
Right. We'll see how that ends up. Yeah, so the legal question sounds like it's going to have to be adaptable, right, over time. So we're going to have to identify new models as the technology changes, and chances are that there'll be a new legal paradigm that takes hold, that will satisfy some and not others, and then there'll be another wave of technology that perhaps upsets it once again. Laurence, you have a different perspective, or not even a different perspective, but a perspective from the side of performance, which has somewhat distinct issues facing it in the generative AI turn. Would you like to, could you speak a little bit to that, about how for performers, say actors and actors in particular, film actors, may be uniquely affected by generative AI?
Yes, absolutely. Well, first I'm going to turn my mic on.
There, can you hear me better? There are many issues around this. One of the burning issues to begin with is the fact that, and I've said this to people before, is that if you are a musician, or you are a writer, or you are a painter, or you make textiles, and your work is ingested by AI and used, it's awful. But you can create other things. If my voice and my image and my performance are taken, that's it. I'm done. There's nowhere else I can go. So that's one of the reasons, and that obviously holds for dancers, ballet dancers, and other sorts of physical performance. So that's one thing. Something I would like to bring up too is about the way generative AI is built. Now, machines don't come up with this stuff on their own. There are training sets. We are the training sets. So a couple years ago, we started getting these casting notices through. And people are going, these are very weird castings I'm being asked to send in. I'm being asked to read lists of words. I'm being asked to do sentences and things. This is very strange. It turns out that what was happening was that these weren't real castings. These companies were trawling actors, and they wanted actors specifically because of the way we pronounce things and perform things and all that. They were taking the castings and using them as training data. And nobody was paid. Nobody was told. And then they're like, okay, we're going to pay you £50. How's that? £50 to use my voice in perpetuity, and I have no control over which world dictator's voice mouth that goes into, or which porno film that's put into. That's not right either. So one of the issues we really have is about consent and control. And that's the strike in the US, which my union is watching very closely. That is one of the issues. It's about the fact that for years, and AI did not invent this, but for years actors have been forced to sign over moral rights. And initially, back in the day when we had pens and papers and cassette tape, the idea was we should have the right to, you film this film, we should, as the company, have the right to spread it around the world. Fine. But over time, those moral rights have been taken and taken and taken, which is why when an actress called Beverly Standing a few years ago had done some recordings for English language tapes in China, discovered that she was the voice of TikTok and she could not get paid. Now, she ended up taking them to court and they settled out of court. But they were saying, but we own your rights. You signed over the rights. We have your voice. We can do anything with it. And this kind of story is happening over and over and over. So it's difficult because the attitude I often get is, you're whiny creative. Get with the tech. It's going to come. You know, your job is easy. Why don't you get a real job? Be a lawyer. Yeah, I know. But it is actually a real issue. You know, as Mike said, the arts in this country are booming, which is why I, and you can tell from my accent, came here. I chose to come here because the arts in the UK are amazing. The training is second to none. But you risk losing it because the sector is being hollowed out. It was being hollowed out by lots of things, including pandemic and cost of living. But now all of those little day-to-day jobs that we do between the big jobs, you know, I was the voice of a cartoon for Cartoon Network for 2 years. I was the title role. Fabulous. In between, I record dictionaries, or I do English language tapes in order to pay the rent. And some people are going, those jobs don't take any skill. Well, let an AI do them. And suddenly, that line of work, that younger people, people from different backgrounds, people trying to get away into the industry who didn't go to Eton or didn't go to Cambridge and wasn't in the footlights, all of these people trying to come in from non-traditional ways, they're blocked from that kind of work. So it's very hard to build a career. But even people at the top of their game, there's a problem. So I do a lot of video games. Some of you may know me as Joanna Dark in Perfect Dark Zero. There are a few people go, and a few people go, what? And here's the issue. We're being told, if you don't accept this fee, low fee, we're just going to take everything that you recorded for game one, and we're going to put it in the DLCs, in the downloadable content. And oh, by the way, we wanted to do a versions 2, 3, 4, and 5. We don't need to. We'll just take everything you did for the first thing and recreate it for those. So this is a real burning issue for my industry because we have signed over those moral rights. In theory, they can do anything they want with them.
So this is interesting, and these are issues that are, for those of you who are familiar with the issues that are being argued about in Hollywood currently, these are very similar issues, right? The question of what happens once you have given over a certain amount of rights, or you've already participated in some sort of performance, and how that performance could then be perpetuated without any compensation. And I can, okay, so before I move on to the next question, which I have one for Linden, I just want to remind the audience that we have Slido, which we're using for taking questions and insights. The QR code is right here on the wall, and I'll be checking the Slido in just a moment and looking at audience questions. So Linden, turning to you, in your work, working with the mayor's office, You're focused in particular on the impact of AI on the creative industries, thinking from the perspective of a major city like London. And you mentioned to me earlier that you're actually also in conversation with your counterparts in other cities around the world who are really just starting to get a handle on the set of risks and opportunities that AI presents. Now, mostly what we've been hearing about are risks, and I'm sure that you can name a few as well. I'm wondering if you can also talk a little bit about some of what you are discovering and what you are hearing from your colleagues about this mix of risk and opportunities to the creative sector from AI.
Yeah, sure. So to give a bit of background on this and what we've done with the Mayor's Office. So at the start of the year, Justine Simons, who's the Deputy Mayor for Culture in London, she set me off on a task to figure out what the impact of AI would be on the creative industries. So then I spent about 3 months reading every report that existed, speaking to stakeholders, searching the internet, then came up with this huge kind of presentation / resource pack, which captures the opportunities and the risks of 7 sectors, like Mike said. What I've been doing since then is going around to the industry and explaining the opportunities and the risks so that people know and understand this. And I feel like I've honestly been everywhere so far with this thing. I was in Brazil last week for a global conference with world city leaders. I was in Finland a couple of weeks ago. I've done it for major institutions in the UK. Because our thinking is that at the moment, people don't really have any idea about what's going on at all. And there's a huge amount of fear and anxiety around this because of that lack of knowledge. And how can you do anything about this if you don't know anything? For reference as well, there are 2 online ones I'm doing too. One is tomorrow from 2:30 till 3:30 online as part of the AI Fringe. So it's on the website there. And then there's also another one in December as well, on December the 4th from 2:30 till 3:30, if you want to get in on some of that information. But yeah, essentially what I'm finding is that, like I say, nobody has any idea at all about this. And that's globally as well. When I was at this conference last week, and this is from, you know, the mayor of Vancouver was there, we had reps from Australia, Dubai, Brazil, all over the world. No one really has any understanding. So what we're trying to do is to get this information out there, but then secondly, after that, because the Mayor's Office is really good at convening different people, different stakeholders, what we want to do next is to get the Arts Council on board, get the British Council on board, get those global cities and leaders on board to really come together to think, what do we need to do as a creative sector to support and to get the most in terms of the benefits of this technology, but also to minimize some of the risks of it.
Yeah, fantastic. Actually, it's interesting you mentioned the issue of information, like the lack of information that people have. And I think that probably everyone on this panel can agree that in the communities that you are part of and the stakeholders that you work with, overcoming the question of understanding the technology and understanding the stakes is a major issue. Shobana, if I could actually direct a question to you, because you mentioned something when we were chatting yesterday about the question about the issue of transparency. Right? And this probably from like a legal standpoint, meaning what is revealed when you are striking a deal, say, with a buyer of some sort of creative work, and how much is revealed. Could you say a little bit more about what you were thinking about the issue of transparency?
Well, I think as we heard, previous.
Yep. But
we've got this back on. As we heard in previous panels as well, I think there is this issue about transparency and accountability, and I think that's one thing that's going to be having to be looked forward in much more serious way ahead. And I do feel that with technology, we'll be able to have that much more clearer in terms of what's recorded, what are the terms that you are entering into, what are those attribution rights, because when you went into these kind of contracts several years ago, you probably never envisaged like the kind of uses, what are being done, or you weren't informed. We've seen how the transformation in the data protection laws have come with GDPR and the issue about informed consent or legitimate expectation of legitimate use of those data. And I think a similar situation is going to come into the terms of how AI is going to be deployed and implemented as well. And if it's going to be implemented, how are those royalties? The problem we have is, of course, most of the, and this is a real conundrum with generative AI, is about, and you'll know better than anyone else, I think, Mike, with the Alan Turing Centre, that it's very hard because these are like black box models. You don't know where all the information has come out. You can't get that transparency. But there are obviously cofactors that can be taken into effect. But if there can be much more clarity on what the terms of those licenses are, and limitations on the use, and of course fair use. I think that's going to be another area where litigation is going to be having to go to clear out, if it's not going to be settled by alternative dispute resolution, about what is proper fair use of your data. Because that was a clear defence on most other cases, and it's still being applied, and I think that's going to be really tested.
Right, right, and setting the bounds of fair use could really spell the difference for a lot of your clients, I imagine. Yeah, Naomi, back to you about this, the question about transparency. I imagine that many of your members work freelance, right? So they don't have a direct employer-employee relationship in which they can be routinely asking questions of their employer. What tools are you going to use? How are you going to use my work? And so on. And so they're potentially entering into agreements somewhat blind as to what the terms will be, but also what else has happened before they entered into the agreement in the business of the buyer that they're working with, and what might happen with the material that they contract over. Is there something you could say a little bit about that particular conundrum, that sort of information asymmetry?
Yeah, I think one of the issues is all the contracts that have already been signed to date, that, as we've discussed, there's a lot of catch-all clauses in there about any technology to be invented in the future throughout the universe in perpetuity, et cetera, et cetera. And now we're kind of seeing the impact of that. We actually had it with music streaming, that a lot of our members, it wasn't envisaged when they recorded a piece of music that it could be streamed around the world and that they would get no income from that, pretty much. And so, but because of the catch-all clauses in contracts, it's very difficult to argue that those rights aren't there and, they've been assigned. So then you're always trying to claw back or argue that copyright law needs to change in order to make sure that creators are fairly remunerated. But I think what's really interesting about the Writers Guild of America deal is that it's a sort of collectively bargained solution. So what's great and gives me a bit of hope is that it doesn't deal with the issue of is there copyright in an AI generated work and what do you do about ingested works, but it does have broadcasters and producers agreeing principles around how they will use AI generated work and how they will use human creators, and the fact that they talk about they won't use source material that is AI generated, or if they do, it will be transparent and it will be clear to the writer that the source material is AI generated. I mean, how you police that is perhaps another matter, but it's great to see that broadcasters and producers might, in a negotiation with unions, actually agree to some basic principles. So I think that's something we're going to try and take forward in the UK, but it doesn't stop the bigger issues around enforcing copyright and whether there's copyright infringement. So it sort of has the whole horse already bolted, but at least it might help to limit some of the use of AI generated work and preserve some of the work that our members have in creating music and writing music for TV shows, for example, writing library music, performing, production music, all those roles that might go potentially.
Yeah, and it's. I mean, it is. I guess it is promising that some of the major, buyers of creative labor are potentially on the hook. I mean, they're too visible in a way to entirely escape. But then there are all the smaller transactions, right? There are all the much smaller companies who are hiring a freelancer here and a freelancer there. So we've definitely covered a variety of risks and questions that are being raised in the creative industry. But I do want to take a look at, we have one question that's come across the Slido, which sort of turns this question around a little bit. And the question comes from Jake. How can technology like AI empower creatives and creativity? In what ways can AI improve the work of creatives and help more people bring their ideas to life? Now, Linden, I know that you cited an example in our conversation yesterday, but I wonder if you'd like to respond to that question.
Yeah, so as an example, I've got a friend, many friends who are actors, but one in particular who's a filmmaker, makes films on a monthly basis, and he was pitching a film to some film producers, and he needed to make, what was it called again?
Storyboard.
Yeah, he needed to make a storyboard for his film. And usually these things take a lot of time, take weeks to make. He made it within a day, because he was able to use, the large language models like ChatGPT to help craft what he was doing. He was able to get high quality images using the image generators. It just massively helped out with his whole process. And there are so many tools that people can access when it comes to filmmaking or anything creative that can actually enhance your creative works. So in a sense, AI can really empower people and democratize filmmaking, artwork, all of these kind of things, music generation, in a way that couldn't be done before. So there are huge opportunities, and also I mentioned in our conversations yesterday, there is a challenge here in terms of when we talk about opportunities, an opportunity to who? Because an opportunity to one person might be a risk for another. To take another example, text-to-speech technology is really getting quite good now. And somewhere like Apple, for example, are really testing automatically generated audiobooks. So essentially, in theory, they could just upload an audiobook and have an AI read it out in whatever voice you want. And there you go. Now, from an audiobook creating perspective, that's great, because that gives you so much more opportunities. You can have it done in many voices. It's so much quicker and cheaper. But from a performance person's perspective, that is horrible. That is not good at all. And that is such a threat to people's work. And there was a survey by Equity recently, which found that 93% of audio artists are concerned about AI technology. And what we're seeing with that is that when it comes to things like radio adverts or YouTube adverts, which are, key parts of like a voice artist's repertoire, that's going to AI. So again, huge opportunity on the one hand, but huge risk on the other. So there were two sides to all of these things.
Laurence, you actually mentioned something about, in particular, we're talking about the problems facing, or the risks that translators face, or that maybe that we all face from assigning translation duties to AI. Could you say a bit more about that?
Yeah, I should mention that's another one of the hats I wear. So, interestingly enough, translators are sort of the canary in the coal mine with all of this, because back during the Cold War, Russia and America didn't like each other very much. And there was suddenly a great need, for some reason, to translate lots and lots of material. And so the governments went, oh, we know, we'll get a machine to do it. It was thought a great idea, and they threw lots of money in it. And by the early 60s, they realized it was a terrible mistake, that it wasn't going to work. So all the funding was rescinded, and then what happened was money went into tools that would assist the human translator. And so you have these things called translation memories, where basically the translator will build these memories and make their own translation units. So an apple is a poem, and you put that in, and then you can go on. And they do have their use. And I think a lot of the AI things will have a use in that way. But here's the issue with that, and I think it's the same issue with these tools that let you draw or add a voice. The machine constrains. The machine has its own constraints, which means you then have to work within its parameters. So both when I've used a translation memory tool and when I've used one of these AI things, you find yourself constrained to choices that the programmer's made. Now, as a programmer, this is great fun. But as an end user, it's a problem. And there's something I want to show you. So there is a website, and I won't say it because I don't want to advertise it. But it's called, they say, there's a voice for every need, creative, corporate, or entertainment. the product developer, the educator, the marketer, the author, as if there's only one kind. So if you are doing a pitch and you're like, I need a podcaster voice. Oh, they've got one. I'll just take this one. You're then taking the one that they decided. But what if you want somebody who's originally from St. Lucia and has spent time in the States and has a parent from Switzerland and did a gap year in Germany? What's that accent going to sound like? Is that going to be on here? No. Because the other thing, and this is going to be putting my computer science hat on again, the way AI works is statistics. There's no intelligence, it's statistics. And anybody of you who's done GCSE statistics knows that what it does is it gets rid of the outliers. AI succeeds when it gives you a stereotype, a norm. That is amazing when you are looking for cancer cells. And that is disastrous when it comes to the arts. Because we want those outliers. We want those weird voices. We want the people like my kid who grew up in this country and was educated here and sounds as American as I do because her best friend was from New York, but she's British. Or the person who doesn't have any hands but is an artist. And this is my big beef about our running pell-mell to AI. It's a great tool, but it's not perfect, and it's nothing more than a tool. Our humanity should be reflected in the creativity and the stories, particularly right now. We want all sorts of different stories and weird things that we haven't come up with. And all the AI is doing is taking what's already out there and giving you the most likely thing that's going to come after. That's it.
So this is an interesting point. I think that we have seen in the past, and this is not the first time, where we've seen how technology introduced into the creative world has a shaping effect on what gets created. And actually, I don't know, Naomi, this may be something that you can speak to about how technology, and particularly generative AI, may be altering the way musicians make music, or the kinds of music that they make. And actually, Shobana, I'm going to ask you this question as well, because I imagine you might be seeing some of this in your work.
Yeah, I think, well, so I went to a music-focused AI event recently, and there was a demonstration of a singer, a work that she'd written, and she's quite a folky singer. And what they did with the AI system is basically allow her to experiment with it in completely different styles that are not her own. And it's something that she probably would not have done in a studio with session musicians. Or if she had, it would have taken weeks and weeks to do, because you'd need a different crowd of characters potentially for different genres of music. So it was sort of, as part of the creative process, it was enabling her to experiment with things that she wouldn't have otherwise experimented with. So I think, you know, it's clear that there is an opportunity there for AI to help with the creative process. But obviously, we still have, as a union, the concern about the job replacement. I think, so I think that there's definite potential with the assistive side of things, and I think it could make music created in different ways. I'm very concerned about the personality rights issue as well, and the idea that, Grimes, the artist, has developed a system so that people can create music using her voice, and will kind of license her likeness, but she wants to get 50% of the proceeds. But the question is, does she have a right to actually have 50% of the proceeds? Again, has that horse already bolted once you've put the software out there and you're enabling people to use it? But I feel like at the moment we're seeing a lot of gimmicks, because there's a lot of, do you want to hear this track but recorded, in the style of Oasis or whatever? So, and people kind of like it because it's a bit strange and it's a bit different, and you can hear things that you would never normally hear. But whether those things will ever become actually popular and commercially successful is another matter. So I don't know, I feel like we're still quite early on in this journey really, and it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out. The important thing is for us to have a good framework. So I think we've got to have a framework that maintains the certain boundaries that we have in place through existing copyright law, potentially builds on those, but also ensures that there is fair remuneration. Otherwise, we're just going to see creative jobs totally decimated.
Yeah, absolutely. Shobana, I'm going to pause for asking this next question, but we have one from the audience that I thought was interesting that I want to actually direct to Linden first, which is, what would be your thoughts on how career leaders and creative arts teachers in schools should guide and prepare students for these developments? So this would be like, so I mean, I don't imagine, I imagine this might come up in your work, but maybe you all have a perspective on this, but I'm just going to start with you.
I think it's hard. It is. I wish if I had the answer to that, I'd be earning so much money right now. It is something that we're having to think about in the mayor's office, but it is difficult, obviously. I think there are two sides to this. One is that some software is going to embed AI systems within them anyway. So in a sense, for some of these things, it's about learning the tools, or learning the tools that you're using anyway, and just learning the AI systems within them. Because, for example, Adobe are coming out with some technology, or maybe they just have, where with their image editors, you can change the color of people's clothing, you can remove people in the background, you can adjust things around, and that's AI systems. Google Pixels do that as well. But again, that's already embedded in the software. So in that sense, for some areas, it's just about learning the software and learning those tools within them. Otherwise, in terms of prep, I think to be honest, it's for people to really play about with these things themselves to a certain degree. There'll be things that institutions and organizations can do, but certainly with this tech, I mean, things change every week. The presentation that I have gets updated on a weekly basis because of these things. So I think if you're a university and you set up like an AI course, for example, this one, after 2 months, your course is going to be outdated, So it's going to be difficult for those things to keep up. But yeah, those are my thoughts on that incredibly difficult question.
Well, I mean, I think you did very well.
Thank you. Thank you.
You did very well on that. Well, we're about out of time, but I thought there was a question. If I could get everybody very briefly to say, from your perspective, where you're at regarding whatever creative domain you think you could speak to most specifically, or even just the legal domain. Where are we going to be in 5 years, or even 3 years? You can pick any near future you like, actually, any near future interval. Laurence, why don't we start with you?
Wow. I don't even know where I'm going to be in 3 to 5 years. So I don't see it as entirely bleak. I think one of the things Naomi said is very interesting, is that right now it's the shiny new toy. Do you remember when microwaves were going to cook all of our meals? Yeah, that worked out really well. I think there's going to be some settling down, some shaking down. Honestly, I haven't spoken to anybody who said to me, I'd really rather have an AI write my music, write all my books, act in my movies. So there's definitely a need for people to have that human connection. After all, it's what we missed during the pandemic. I think my concern is really about bad actors. And I don't mean actors within my industry. I mean the people on that, sorry, that was a very terrible pun. And it was just because of something somebody said to me at a different conference, is that I'm concerned about the dictator who uses TrueSync, which is this amazing software where you can move the lips and somebody can dub something in Japanese or a different language, that they're going to use that in a bad way. That's my greater concern. Within the own industry, there's going to be bumps and falls. People are going to be more aware, so that's going to be good. And I think people will be educated, and we will find our way. But what I'm concerned about is the stuff that is aimed at my industry is going to be taken and used on a global scale. And that's what scares me.
Shobana, what about you? What's coming down the pike? What's next?
Well, I think we're going to be going through a full roller coaster ride, I think, over the next 5 years, probably on the legal side of things with artificial intelligence. And I think, as Naomi and Laurence has mentioned, I think there's this big issue about anthropomorphism, about making these, the idea that these are like human-like, with a human way of thinking, that it can actually do things in such a way that it can actually create something that's totally new, because it is pulling off from what's the past. And it really depends on what that creativity is and how it's being used and how it's being vetted. Because we can see even in the creative side of things, and I tell you, lawyers have been using generative AI recently, as we know. And I'll just take this as an example, because you can see how that these hallucinations can actually be very serious as well. So you probably heard about the New York lawyers' stories where they've actually used ChatGPT to create or ask to do its research, to provide 6 cases for this particular, well, provide some cases for this particular, for my particular claimant. It came up beautifully with 6 beautiful cases. And they were real cases, they're reported, and the lawyers were silly enough to ask ChatGPT, are these real cases? And of course, ChatGPT went and said, yes, these are absolutely real, proper cases. You can find them on all legal databases, etc. And the lawyers, without checking anything up, etc., thinking about efficiency, thought and used these in their skeleton arguments, etc., according to what ChatGPT had said, without verifying the data or anything else or checking up the cases at all. They've got into sanctions, but I think more than that, I think the problem is they're being humiliated around the globe and the legal industry for this, because these cases were actually completely, I wouldn't say that they weren't false, they were actually real cases, but they didn't actually in line with what they were submitted for. So it can create a completely different story, and as Laurence was saying, it is a statistical basis of what comes up after the word and what your prompts are. So there could be an issue about reskilling, but also about, because you will have to vet these, whether you're passing off, if you've got a unique voice, a unique actor's voice, etc., they will be passing off claims, etc. But of course, how do you get that fair remuneration if you're just a startup with some, a new artist that's coming into the field? And there is also this issue, I would say, about what we say about closing the walls in which a creative can actually create something new. I mean, as a hobby, I also am a musician. With Indian Hindustani music on sitar, we have ragas, etc., which are traditional ragas, and they're kept. But the compositions that you can make on that are infinite. And how are you going to be curtailing that? How are you going to be using AI to maybe say, all right, we don't need these instrumentalists anymore? But you don't really think about the well-being and the attraction that that can create for the younger generation and everything else. I mean, I do it not because I'm playing for music on stage, but principally for my own well-being. And there's things like this. Why would somebody at school would want to teach them something on music and get into the arts if they didn't see a kind of valid remuneration for that and a way forward?
Could be a real change in real change in the path of our cultures. Yeah,
absolutely.
It could be. Naomi, what about you? What's coming? What do you see coming next?
Well, I think what I would hope is in 3 to 5 years, but hopefully as soon as possible, we'll have a decent policy and legal framework in place, and the principles agreed, so that, you know, where it is assistive to creativity, fantastic. Let's go for it, but let's make sure that humans can still have a career that sustains them throughout their lives, so that we don't see an exodus from the industries that we love. I think there's inevitably going to be some roles that go, but yeah, there's certainly positive elements to it as well. So I believe that people are passionate about the human creator, and I think that the live performance, like the experience of going to a live performance, I think that you can't replicate that with something that's generated by a computer. So that's my hope.
I think all of the theatres in London would support that proposition. Yeah, right. They're still going. And then finally, Linden, what about you?
Yeah, so I think AI is going to be a huge disruptor for the whole of the creative industries. And I always find this interesting because we usually talk about the performers and the front of these things, but not the back. Things like marketing, admin, office work, legal, these recruitment as well, these are all areas which are going to be impacted by AI too, and I don't think we talk about them enough. And I think they're going to have huge wake-up calls as well, and I hope they do, to actually have a think about the impact of all of these things. And I think what could happen is for there to be a kind of divide between those who know how to use AI for the benefit of their creation or their works and those who don't. There was a report by Goldman Sachs earlier this year on this, on the impact of AI across all the sectors, and it found that about 30% couldn't be replaced in our industry. About 5%-ish could be fully replaced by AI, and then the rest, about 70%, would be complemented by AI. So actually there's not that much as a whole that we're expecting to go, but there's a large chunk which could be complemented by it. Because of that, and especially now with young people as well, we're seeing a lot of them starting to use ChatGPT, experiment with those things. So those who know how to use these systems will have a huge advantage over those who don't. And I hope that those who don't do start to embrace it so they don't get left behind.
Great. Well, we'll leave it with that hopeful note, and that encouraging note. So tell your friends, tell your children, get on top of this, to stay on top of this, but also let's hope that that the future of creativity and the desire for the human place in the creative world continues to be as strong as it is now, even in the face of these interesting new pressures and threats. Well, with that, we'll wrap it up. Please join me in thanking our panelists today. It's been a pleasure to be with you.